I'm Patrick Claybon in for Rhett Lewis. This is the NFL Inside Report on an off-season Wednesday, if you believe such things exist. The off-season, that is. But an off-season Wednesday with a ton of implications for the 2022 regular season. We're going to take you through some of those things that will have an impact, including the latest on the league's investigation into Deshaun Watson and the allegations, the 22 allegations against him, the Baker Mayfield situation created by the Browns acquiring Deshaun Watson, as well as Drew Brees and his activity in the tweets regarding his future. To discuss those goings on, I've got some help here on my maiden voyage on this particular ship. NFL Network's Steve Wyche, as well as NFL Network's James Palmer. Gentlemen, let's get started here with the most notable news, a day where we await the result after NFL investigators met with new Browns quarterback. His investigation has a goal of determining whether or not he violated the personal conduct policy. James, for those who've been following this story for almost a full 1.5 years, have been waiting for this part of it. What are your thoughts on the timeline as well as the potential result?
You said a key word there, Patrick, in terms of how it pertains to the personal conduct policy. We have to remember that being found guilty in any sort of criminal activity doesn't play a part, right, in how they view you in breaking the criminal conduct policy. Now, remember, 2 grand juries decided that not to indict him on criminal charges. That doesn't change whether he violated the personal conduct policy in the eyes of the NFL. What usually happens, right, Steve, is when we see that they're talking to the player, the appearance usually is they've gathered a lot of information and now they're talking to the player, right? That usually happens towards the end of what their investigation pertains. They usually don't talk to the player early on in the process. They want all the information presented to the player, then have the conversation with the player. I remember that happening with Tyreek Hill, maybe was that 2 years ago, when he had his happening around this same time of the offseason. It has that feeling, Steve, that like with them meeting with Deshaun now, that we in the next couple weeks could be hearing some sort of determination on a possible suspension.
100%. It seems like the fact that the league is talking to Deshaun Watson now, that we'll have, a couple weeks before training camp at least, knowing if he's going to be suspended, when he will be disciplined, those types of answers that we've all been waiting for. And I'm sure the Browns want to know more than anything.
And they don't know right now. I've talked to people with the Browns.
Right.
They don't know.
Nobody has any idea what's going to happen. And, look, Deshaun Watson said all along, he can't wait to tell his side of things. He wants to lay this out there, his legal team. So we'll see what the league believes. But, you take, what the league has done with the situation before, from Bountygate to Deflategate to, Josh Gordon, to some of these individual circumstances, Ezekiel Elliott probably being the most prominent one, where he's not criminally charged. These were just kind of accusations, pictures, things that could be used as evidence. And, Zeke was, he was disciplined. He was suspended for a while. And so you look at the threshold of the accusations against Deshaun Watson compared to some of the other players who've been disciplined under the personal conduct policy. And I think most people are expecting some type of discipline, but again, you just don't know if Deshaun and his team lay out, say, this is really what happened. He may not be disciplined. And think about the potential blowback, because, for 2 years, we've heard everything against Deshaun Watson. And if all of a sudden he's got evidence that says, yeah, nothing really happened here. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the league handles this. If it's something where he fights it in court, because remember, we've seen cases, and I believe it's Ezekiel Elliott, maybe I'm wrong, where he would play, then not play, then play, then not play. And, so again, I think there'll be some type of at least initial resolution from the league standpoint before training camp.
And the interesting part about it is, guys, like the timeline is still flexible within the civil lawsuits. Like right now, in my understanding, right, if things aren't solved, I believe by June 1, all of these hearings are going to be pushed back to 2023, right, starting in March of 2023. So they could come up with a suspension, whether it's 6 games, 8 games, 10 games. I'd like to get your opinion, Steve. I don't think it's going to be the full season. That's just a guess, though. Whatever the suspension is, almost all of these civil lawsuits might not be finalized. They could be pushed back to 2023. So there is the potential, to my understanding, of no suspension in 2022.
Correct.
There could be a suspension in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, look, the league does not want to put itself in a situation of, okay, let's administer punishment now,
Yep.
right? And then nothing, like you said, these lawsuits get pushed to 2023. Then he's found liable for some or all of them. Is the punishment retroactive? I mean, has he already served it? Are they going to hit him with double jeopardy, so to speak, under the personal conduct policy, or how would that work? So again, this is a really intriguing. You can't say legal because it's not legal, but in terms of the dynamic of the timeline of how this could be handled and if punishment is meted out, and if it's not, again, the public relations, the public potential blowback of no punishment, how that's going to be meted out.
Yeah, the last part, Patrick, I would say is it was interesting. I think it was at the first owners meetings, right? Not these ones coming up. Obviously, he can't speak ahead of time. That would be a wormhole in all sorts of situations.
Yeah.
But when Roger Goodell spoke at the owners meetings and said that they were going to speak to Deshaun Watson when they felt they had enough information. So now that they're meeting, and that was a couple of months ago, it appears then that they think they have enough information to meet with Deshaun Watson.
And it seems like the double-edged sword of evaluating all of these different circumstances. Steve, you mentioned Ezekiel Elliott, of course, Deflategate, the investigation into the Commanders now, right? Evaluating these circumstances individually puts you in a position where you have an independent investigation. And so the ultimate question from people on the outside is, if you're evaluating this individually with your own investigators, with your own information, why is it contingent on things that happen outside of that? Why would you be concerned about the results of a civil lawsuit or the results of a legal investigation if you're having an independent investigation? And why that timeline has to be so different? And that timeline, right, has put teams in positions where they don't know. You mentioned the Browns not knowing, and it gets us to this point where, Steve, do they have a plan to start with Jacoby Brissett, or is there a Jacoby Brissett plan that has this kind of quantum superposition of whether or not Deshaun is going to actually play football and when that happens?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, that's why they went and got Jacoby Brissett, and and didn't go with a younger quarterback. I mean, the Baker Mayfield is what it is. I mean, that ship is sailed.
Yeah,
I
we'll
mean,
hit that in a second.
Do you think zero chance he plays if he's suspended?
Yeah. I mean, we could talk all the while. He could show up to camp. He could still play. Why? Why would he do that? But anyway, we'll get to that in just a minute. But yeah, I mean, that's why they went and got a pro like Jacoby Brissett, who can come in 6 games, 8 games. The team is good enough for Jacoby Brissett, who can manage things to hold it, to hold things down. So he can hand it off and give it to Nick Chubb and all these. And you see the schedule. Do they have any primetime games before like week 6?
They have only 2 primetime games.
And they're in the back half of the season, correct?
No, they're early.
Okay.
That's the thing. I think they're, I have it. Yeah, Thursday night, week 3, Monday night, week 8.
Okay.
Are there 2 primetime games?
So, yeah, I mean, that's a situation where the league is even kind of like, okay, we know Deshaun Watson's one of the most, electrifying players in the NFL, but let's keep him off the prime time. So, one, minimize exposure, even if he is playing, just because of everything that's been alleged against him. And the other is, if he's not playing, is the draw really going to be Jacoby Brissett? But I mean, in terms of the Browns, you better believe, I mean, they would not have made the trade if they did not have plan Bs and all of this in place, knowing that there could be potential discipline in play.
Yeah. And one other little point on this is Patrick made a good point about how these work. And this is this I think, right, the first one we're seeing under the new CBA where this isn't Roger Goodell's call.
Right.
Right. This is independent of Roger Goodell in what happens in here. And so this is a little bit different than what we've seen in the past.
And hopefully, especially considering, because Steve, you mentioned optics and the way things go about, hopefully the league is not taking any action that limits a conversation that we can have surrounding sexual violence. If it's whether it's putting the game in a certain spot or having it at a certain time, I think regardless of whether Deshaun is playing, we have an opportunity to facilitate this conversation, and hopefully we can go about doing that in a way. And in terms of that conversation, Steve, a lot of Deshaun's teammates are going to have to be a part of that. And he has an opportunity this offseason to at least, right, put them in a position to where they can be comfortable having a conversation about him and about the circumstances without causing harm for people who are victims, for people who are going through this. How has he tried to facilitate that relationship thus far?
That's a fantastic question, because what we see publicly and what happens privately are two different things. I mean, these conversations, one, look, in the management of the Browns, they've had to happen. Who do the Browns push out there as the face of their ownership group? It is Dee Haslam. Jimmy Haslam is the name behind it, but they push Dee Haslam out there a lot. She's got some strong opinions, right? So they came out. Remember, it was kind of a fumbled initial press conference where I don't even think they were at the news conference. They were on vacation at a remote site.
They were overseas.
They were overseas. Yeah. And what was said was kind of like, So you've got that part where they're having those internal discussions management-wise, but with players, because they're going to be the ones who have to answer questions for Deshaun. I've been in too many of these situations, SS James, where somebody's, with the Michael Vick dogfighting stuff, his teammates had to talk about it for half a season, if not longer. Things like that. So it's a very tough situation, but this is where you see who your leaders are. Like you said, Patrick, can we have an open discussion about sexual violence, inappropriate behavior, domestic situations? And this is an opportunity for them to speak out on it without possibly violating the trust that they've built up with Deshaun, to speak about it in personal terms or in general terms. But that's something you're hoping that the Browns, and I know they've got a pretty good media relations department and player engagement department, where they're going to have these players prepped, because those questions are going to come from the local folks, and especially folks coming in from out of town who might not even be sports writers, asking about this.
Mm-hmm. I'll piggyback on that, Steve. And it's not just the players, and the organizations are preparing. I talked to other organizations just in jest, right? Going like, what would you do if you guys landed Deshaun Watson? We're talking to two other teams, just kind of about what they would go through the process with. And it was endless what they were listing to me, and how they would have to talk to all of their people on the phone that are taking calls from season ticket holders, and how that conversation would go, because it's a topic that needs to be talked about, and it should be talked about in that locker room. I'm not sure if Deshaun's going to address the team or talk to guys individually, but it's definitely one that I believe as a teammate I would like to have with him. What I'm interested in is how those relationships are, let's be honest, relatively new with those teammates compared to the ones he had in Houston. And I was in Houston plenty, and those guys over the last year, remember, Deshaun didn't talk at all. They had to answer throughout the entire season. And it was very interesting. I don't want to generalize an entire locker room, but you could say the majority were loyal and faithful to Deshaun, and the relationships, from what I was told behind closed doors, were very good, very amicable. He caused no problems in the locker room. There weren't, and when I say that, I mean there weren't arguments with him about this topic or other topics behind closed doors. But this is a new group of guys, and these are new relationships. It's going to be something that has to be done. Apparently, maybe he wants to do it in the Bahamas, where he's taking guys. I don't know, but it's a conversation. If I was a teammate, to put my personal opinion on it, I would want to have.
And Patrick, real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
In the building itself, not just in the locker room. There's a lot of women, a lot of men who feel a certain way. That's an odd dynamic, because I know one team that was involved in the trade talks with Deshaun Watson that caught major blowback from employees in the building. Like, this is not it. This is not it. So, there's a lot of massaging. And again, the Browns, before they made this step, I am sure that they spoke to a lot of people in their building and everything to prepare for this.
They had to. It was about 5 months, Steve, they were interested. So they had to, right?
At least. But I mean, that's another dynamic that might not ever go away.
And to be clear, as James mentioned, the conversations that teams had, right? The things that they were prepared to do. These are things that should be done anyway.
Well
These are
said.
people. These are
Yeah,
people who should
good
be
point.
empowered. These are discussions that we should be having, whether or not Deshaun Watson plays a single down in 2022. And the fact that he got there takes us to the next discussion, because it led to more than one thing being set in motion. That was the start of the end of Baker Mayfield, and we've gone through some iterations of this Baker job hunt, right? He was calling a shot, saying he wanted Indy, he didn't want Carolina. Then Indy wanted and got Matt Ryan, and Carolina said the disinterest was mutual. Then the draft, we had some quarterbacks go, and now we're here, which is nowhere for Baker at the moment. So James, what's up? Is anybody trading for Baker Mayfield? Who is still involved in this process?
I got a text this morning from inside the organization that said nothing is going on right now. I mean, absolutely nothing is going on. And I think it's kind of like that, right? That quarterback carousel or musical chairs. And is there a chair for Baker to fall into? You mentioned Indy. He had interest there. When I talked to people in Indianapolis, they had no interest. There was a small amount of interest, some with the Panthers. And then they trade him and get Matt Corral, and that's gone. I mean, maybe Seattle falls out of love with Drew Lock halfway through the season. I mean, or somebody gets hurt, Steve, in terms of health-wise from another team right now. But right now, nothing is happening. And this has been a fascinating ride to watch, honestly, from just a journalism standpoint because of the way it's gone down, right, Steve? Because if you think about the way this has happened, I go back to, earlier in the year, I was doing a Thursday night game in Cleveland against the Broncos, if you remember this. And they were determining whether Baker was going to play in this game. And it comes down to Wednesday's practice when Case Keenum comes out with Stefanski, and he's at practice. They tell everybody on Wednesday, Keenum's the starter. OBJ and Jarvis Landry were not going to play in that game.
Right.
They ended up playing in that game after they found out in practice on Wednesday that Case Keenum was going to be the quarterback. And when I found that out, I was like, this is
your son.
Yep.
This is a spot, man. And so I mean, it has been. And then the funny part is, there's coaches that I know there, Steven, I know that think the world of Baker at the same time. So he is a polarizing personality, but I don't know. I would like to see your take, because I'm watching Jimmy Garoppolo go through a situation in San Francisco where he takes them in 2019 to the Super Bowl, and then they trade 3 first-round picks for a prospect, not a Deshaun Watson, who the last time we saw him play as a top 5 quarterback in football, and he went out and played and took him to the postseason again. It is a really wild ride, and I want to get the timeline down a little bit, because if what I'm hearing is right, that at the combine, Baker's representatives were made clear that they would potentially go after a top quarterback. I'm not sure how he was lied to. And that's just my opinion. If he found out at the combine that they would maybe be going after a Russell Wilson or a Aaron Rodgers or a Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, I mean, look, he may not have been lied to, but it hurt. I mean, it's like Matt Ryan.
Of course. Yeah.
Matt Ryan was like, oh, okay, you're in on Deshaun Watson? I tell you what, I've given 14 years to this organization. I rescued it from the ashes. Get me out of here. And, they did him a solid and got him to, potentially.
Pretty good spot, actually.
Yeah, I mean, and so with Baker, you talked about how, like, Jarvis and OBJ decided to play. I've talked to countless teams who are like, don't think that stuff got past us.
Mm-hmm.
We know our locker rooms, and that's not going to work. So I do think at some point Baker will be on another team, but the longer this goes on, that's more time for Jimmy Garoppolo to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And teams would much rather, I don't think the Niners trade Jimmy to Seattle, but they might. They might. I mean, for real. I mean, dynamic.
That's 9 weeks to take a good solid look at Drew Lock.
Yeah.
Because by the time he's thrown, it's mid-July, beginning.
Correct.
Then you have an opportunity that these teams have seen some, and then the point you're making, Steve, is that throws Jimmy now into the mix, and it makes it even more complicated.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Baker to find a spot.
And James, this. there are a lot more teams that would take Jimmy G than Baker Mayfield
Mm-hmm.
for Jimmy's durability issues, for everything, because they saw how he handled the Trey Lance situation last year, which was just unbelievable. So with Baker Mayfield, I think it may come down to, either the Broncos paying his entire salary, because then somebody might take him, maybe Houston. I don't know. I don't know if they want to introduce that into what, a guy in the last year of his contract, into what they're trying to build. So, and I've talked to several people that the Seahawks, they're like, we've heard no interest from the Seahawks. So again, it could come down to the salary. I don't know, but I think the longer this plays out, the more Jimmy Garoppolo enters the fray as the premier veteran trade target as compared to Baker.
And that's the thing. We have two quarterbacks. Both were injured at the end of the season. Both needed surgery after the season came to an end. One of those quarterbacks was a couple of plays away from going to the Super Bowl. The other quarterback who was hurt, and you can clearly make the case that Baker shouldn't have been playing. I think Jarvis and Odell were probably making that case, right, when they elected to play with Case, but not with Baker. But he was out there, and the results, James, they weren't good.
No, I mean, you have to remember those first 2 weeks. I don't want to speak exactly on stats. He was completing like 80% of his balls through the first 2 weeks. I know it's a small sample size, but then the injury happened week 3, and he really wasn't the same guy. I know he talked on a podcast about how it affected him physically, affected him mentally, lost his self-confidence, and those things, because we did see the offense working the year before, right? Him operating out of that play action with a really good run game that you should be relying on if you're Cleveland, and running the football quite a bit. So yeah, the injuries definitely hurt, but there was a little more to Keenum playing that Thursday night game than just Baker's health.
So, but yeah, for anybody, right, go tape your non-throwing shoulder down, tape your arm to your side, and try to throw a football. It's exceedingly difficult, and we have seen Baker play at a very high level, but there's a lot. There's a lot that goes into this decision. There's a lot that goes into the direction of a franchise, and we've seen recently Indianapolis, for example, in Carolina as well. You try to take a shot at a former top 10 pick, and things don't necessarily work out. Go ahead.
Real quick, this kind of hit me, and it's kind of a Baker Mayfield feels like he was lied to and wants out of Cleveland. He's being replaced by a quarterback in Deshaun Watson, who felt like he was lied to in Houston and refused to play for the Texans, and is now replacing Baker Mayfield. Different situations. Deshaun was playing at a top 5 quarterback level.
Easy.
I mean, that roster was terrible in 2019, and he led the league in passing. He was fantastic, but he felt like ownership lied to him. Now, Jimmy Haslam has said that he stated, I don't think Baker was talking about ownership when he mentioned that he was lied to. I'm not sure what exactly he meant by that, but that's where Deshaun Watson's issues lied. In Houston, and it's just kind of a sense of irony. I know the situations are different, but they both feel like they were lied to. Both won out. One's replacing the other.
That's what they say about grass and the relative greenness of it sometimes. We're going to continue our discussion with a quarterback who's going to Canton, Ohio, but he's also on the Twitter machine talking about his future. What's the latest on Drew Brees? We'll hit you up with that when we come back here on NFL Inside Report. We're back here on the NFL Inside Report. Patrick Claybon in for Rhett Lewis with Steve Wyche and James Palmer taking me through my maiden voyage on this particular ship, which is always captained by Thomas Warren. Thank you, James. Let's get to some meeting news. We got the Spring League meeting next week in Atlanta, and over a couple of days, minority coach and GM prospects from each team are going to get a chance to network with owners and high-ranking executives as the league continues to make a push to have some more diversity in its ranks, especially the coaching and management ranks. And Steve, this is a conversation that we had extensively, during the lead up to the Super Bowl, and it gets us to that point where who are the decision makers here? Well, there they are. They're the owners. So what are we expecting to get next week?
Yeah, like you said, each team has to nominate a potential GM candidate and potential head coaching candidate to come to this league meeting to meet with team officials and owners, if the owners so choose to meet with them. Nobody's being required to do this. And this is a suggestion that's been made by Tony Dungy and Marvin Lewis and a lot of people for years. Like, these owners have no idea personally who a Joe Witt is, or in a Giro Evero from, the defensive coordinator for the Broncos, and, Joe Witt from the secondary coach for the Cowboys, or Kai Harley, the capologist for the New Orleans Saints. So this is an opportunity for them to meet them. Again, I'll be at these meetings. I'm going to be very curious to see how many of them actually meet them, how many of them are sincere, because the good clubs, good ownership, let's say you're the Rams, right? Sean McVay is going nowhere, but if Stan Kroenke or the team president wants, Kevin Demoff, maybe they meet with these guys because they have such a churn of people in the front office that, or on their coaching staff. Okay, let's get this guy in here just for whatever reason, or we can recommend him to somebody else, to another team, because people are always coming to our guys and asking us. We could say, hey, look, you may want to look at this guy right here. There may be some other teams who are just like, I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to do this. We'll see. I will be there watching, and I will not be biting my tongue publicly on those who do not participate in this. It's just going to be intriguing to see what it comes out. It's a step. And as you mentioned, Patrick, said the league continues to make a push for diversity. This is not a league issue. This is an individual team issue as to who they want to hire and things like this. So it's a step. The league is trying to make it happen. We'll see if anything comes out of this. But again, I do applaud the league for at least trying again another measure to introduce owners to people who may be out of their circle they're unfamiliar with.
And I think, Steve, this is a good setting for it, right? Because if you look at the other owner meetings, all the GMs and head coaches are there. They're not at this meeting.
Some of them will be there. Some of them will be there as well.
Yeah. But it's a small, to my understanding, much smaller group that'll be there on next week, which to me, I think plays as a positive for those that are going to be down there as part of this. And I do want to make sure that you keep everybody in check, my man. Like, I want to hear who's showing up. And I want to hear who's there to have these meetings, because to me, and Steve, you've been around this league longer than I have, but we both have seen it a ton of people who are hired because of their relationships with the people who are hiring. How many assistant coaches in this league, I'll just say it, are not very good, but they know the right people and keep getting gigs when that guy keeps getting either an OC or a DC job or a head coaching job.
Yeah.
And it's because of who they know. And that those relationships need to be broadened. The same people are knowing the same people over. And so that point is, if you hire people that you have developed a relationship with, let's increase the relationships. And certain people are not putting themselves in a position to expand that. And I think this is an effort to do it. It's been put in place. You mentioned Tony Dungy, others. It's been something recommended by people, by minority candidates that have been hired and minority candidates that haven't been hired. So ones that have even succeeded through the process have said, I believe that this is something that will benefit us. And so I do applaud the effort. I want to see what comes out of it moving forward. One example comes to mind, and a direct benefit of this is I live here in Denver, and I'll be frank, the Broncos have never been known to be an extremely diverse organization or front office organization. But now a name comes to mind in Kelly Klein, who came with George Payton. And I was told her sitting in on all of their head coaching candidate interviews that they went through provided a completely different perspective they were not ready for to everybody else in the room of these candidates, and they absolutely loved it and never thought about it in the first place. Somebody coming from a different background with a different perspective, helping interview their prospective candidates, did wonders for their interview process. And to me, that is like a direct example of the more diversity you have, maybe the more successful you can have, more success you can have it in the hiring process. But we're just going to see, in my opinion, Steve, I want to hear what you have to say after being there in terms of actually how it went down, because on paper right now, talking about it seems like a good idea.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Kelly, because part of the diverse nominees are women as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the push. The one thing where I'm just kind of like still like, me, I've seen the evidence to make
right
me a
there with you,
legitimized
Steve.
cynic. Is that a lot of these white assistant coaches who keep getting hired, they never had to have the official introduction. These dudes are getting hired off a rep. Right, they're getting hired off a rep. You touch Sean McVay, you're there. Oh, unless you're Raheem Morris.
Yeah.
That's, again, call me a cynic, but I think I've got about a dossier the length of the Constitution plus that could provide me evidence that maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. But again, the effort, it should be applauded.
Yeah, it's not cynical, right? It's just an analysis of the things that have happened, right? And I guess the goal would be to have women and minority candidates a part of the front office where it's not contingent on them to have some incredible success to justify them being there. They could just be there, and they could be bad, right? But that they would still, at the very least, be there. And so we look forward to hearing what people have to say. And James, probably look forward to seeing who chooses to not be there as well.
I think that's extremely telling. I mean, to me, I look at billionaires as probably people that are pretty good in business. My assumption would be if you're very good in business, you would try to improve your business in any capacity possible. That to me makes sense, but for some reason doesn't happen. If I'm that good at business, I would uncover every stone possible and in every opportunity to better my $1 billion business or $1 billion franchise. To not attend would be mind-blowing to me in an opportunity to better your business. I mean, Steve, honestly, I'm kind of, now that I said it out loud, I'm kind of like, what would that show the rest of your organization? Are you trying as much as everybody below you to better us as an organization if you were to skip it?
Oh, we'll see, because there's some teams that hire coaches and GMs every 4 years, who tend to just bring in the same 2 diversity candidates as the other teams just so they can check a box with the Rooney Rule. Here's something I want you guys just to, because me and Jim Trotter do this, from time to time. Just go on team websites, and it'll say, you go into the team index and it'll say front office. Look at the pictures. Just look at the pictures of the executives in the front office folks on there. It's always, I did it the other day and was like, ain't a whole lot change. So again, we'll see. Again, A for effort. I will be there. I trust. Ooh, I will be there.
At the very least, it provides us an opportunity to have the discussion. Because this is not an exclusive NFL problem. This is a United States of America problem. This is a planet Earth problem. And the way that power is distributed along people on this planet. And so we'll see who's actually interested in facilitating access to these positions and move from there. Because like Steve and James said, we don't know. We're gonna find out. All right, we're gonna find out next week. We're gonna have to wait a little bit longer to find out the future, or at least the post-career future of one Drew Brees. But before we get to Brees, let's cover the offseason for the Saints, guys, because it was relatively quiet. Dennis Allen comes back. I think he's going to his 13th year with the organization. Everything was about bringing everybody back, including Jameis Winston. They get Chris Olave, Trevor Penning in the first round of the draft. Then here comes the Honey Badger, and now shout out to the state of Louisiana, by the way, with Rhett. Not here today.
He's so upset he's not doing it.
We got Lucher High School's own Jarvis Landry now back in the Pelican State. He's got a $3 million base deal. So we've got all of these additions, and now Drew Brees is tweeting. Let's look at the tweet, because people have had a lot of opportunities to discuss the tweet. Despite speculation from media, side note, you wear a microphone on Sundays, Drew, and Saturdays. By my future this fall, I'm currently undecided. I may work for NBC. I may play football again. I may focus on business and philanthropy. I may train for the pickleball tour, senior golf tour, coach my kids, or all of the above. I'll let you know. Okay, Drew, I guess you'll let us know. James, what's happening there?
What's
going on?
My thought is, reading that, I'm going to rule out several of them right off the bat. He just had shoulder surgery, even though it's his, I believe, left shoulder. Pickleball's probably out. And I'm going to, but I'm going to say this has the appearance of I need to make sure I continue to have some sort of leverage in some capacity. I'll be frank. I covered his final NFL game. That did not look like a guy who could come back and play even another week in the NFL, let alone miss an entire season and come back and play again. It's just none of it, Steve, adds up. They've been trying to get their cap situation that Drew Brees' contracts have put them in over the last X number of years by pushing money forward all the time. They're still doing it a little bit to some capacity right now. But, bringing him back just financially doesn't work. Play-wise just doesn't seem to work. I think this is it just seems like I'm looking for my next move, and I'm going to make sure I create as much leverage about going about that as I can.
100%. I mean, that's what it is. It's like, okay, if it's not going to work with NBC, let me just put this out there that I've got these options. And he does. I mean, Drew could run for governor,
Yeah.
I mean, he'd win. So, look, my thing is if he's coming back, it's not going to be with the Saints. I mean, his relationship with Sean Payton was one thing. Sean Payton is not there. Yeah, Pete Carmichael, the OC, has the relationship with Drew. But they like Jameis Winston. I mean, last year, they were never going to say it out loud, but they were like, this locker room and this coaching staff, and everyone wants to prove that they can win without Drew. And they were winning until Jameis got hurt.
Yep.
And they had a boatload of injuries. So they –
boatload's an understatement.
Yeah, an understatement.
More unique lineups than any team in NFL history.
Right. I mean, Taysom Hill played every place but center just about.
Yeah.
And now he's been relegated to tight end. And so, I mean, this is Drew just kind of creating some leverage. Drew's a great dude. He's going to land on his feet, whatever he decides to do. But if he comes back to play, it's not going to be for the Saints. Oh, and here's one for you, Patrick. If you want to really have fun. Is a team going to sign Jimmy G or Baker ahead of Drew?
They would have to be very, very. It would have to be an attractive situation on both parties, and I think we would need to see some social media video of Drew throwing a ball out of a stadium or something to facilitate that. But in terms of his old team, so now we talked about. I mentioned the fact that Jarvis is back in his home state. The Honey Badger is back in his home state. Does that change, Steve, how you feel about this team that like we said, believed they could win last year and did until Jameis got hurt?
Oh, I've talked to people there all offseason. They think they're going to be a very good football team. That's why when everyone's just like, okay, Tom's back, and we're all crowning the Buccaneers, the NFC champs, they're like, oh, go right ahead. We're not going anywhere. Now, a lot of that is everything I'll say is contingent on the health of Jameis Winston. If he can come back and play, they've got weapons all over the place. Okay, so now you had Chris Olave and Jarvis Landry to Michael Thomas, who hasn't played basically in 2 years. They feel really good about where their offense is going to be. They think their offensive line is fine. Yeah, they lost Teron Armstead, but, as they'll be quick to remind you, he never played a complete season. So, they think they can fix things on the offensive line. And defensively, that's been their bread and butter for years, even in Drew's final years. So now, you've got Cam Jordan on the front line. You got DeMario Davis on the next line. Now you add Marcus May and Honey Badger to a secondary that's got Marshawn Lattimore. They've got leaders at every level, but then you add Jarvis, who's trying to hang on to his career. He comes in with a chip on his shoulder to go with Michael Thomas's, just an undescribable chip. Okay, and then you add Ty Matthews' chip on the shoulder. That's a new injection of how you like me now. I'm going to show you to a team that's kind of set. I really like the Saints again. And if Jarvis is healthy and if Ty is healthy, I really, really like them as a possible deep run playoff team in the NFC.
Can we measure chips on shoulders?
I do. I got the chip tracker going. It's big.
Check your trip. I can't even say it. Red leather, yellow leather. Check your chip tracker, because I think Tyrann Mathieu might be the biggest of the three Steve mentioned. I mean, with really Kansas City having no interest in bringing him back, and after he wins team MVP 2 of the 3 years he's there, and oh yeah, Patrick Mahomes is on that team all 3 of those seasons.
Right.
I think he knows how valuable he is. He knows how good he is. And to go back home to New Orleans, full circle, in a place where he didn't think, and I think it's one of the, and it should be chronicled more, best stories the NFL has had in Tyrann Mathieu's transformation as a human being, probably, from when he got into the NFL to now, to where he didn't even want to be anywhere near New Orleans because he didn't think he could handle it as a person, to now embracing it and wanting to be there. Like, I can't imagine what he will do that first time he comes out of the tunnel in one of the loudest places that, Steve, we've been in this league, and what that'll be like. But to Steve's point, look at the way their offseason's gone. I think they don't need to tell you that they're confident. I think their moves tell you how confident they are, because when I went down and did LSU's pro day and talking to people down there, there was an appearance of no interest of a quarterback that trade with the Philadelphia Eagles went through for. They were hoping to get, and no lie, this was before the draft, a wide receiver and a tackle. They ended up getting a wide receiver and a tackle. To have their interest in Malik Willis, which to my understanding is very similar to what the Falcons' interest in him was. And that interest, what I'm saying is, we think he's a great player, great person, smart guy. This is a project that's going to take a couple of seasons. To not have that interest, goes, we think we can win right now. Yeah. And then the core that Steve's mentioning, I mean, you didn't even mention Alvin Kamara's name.
No.
I mean, like they went from having, and I did several of their games last year, to, you can clearly say, the worst wide receiving group in the NFL last year. Yeah. And all 3 of their top 3 targets now were not on the team last year. And you go to Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and Jarvis Landry. I think this is a great spot for Jarvis. The Browns still liked him, to my understanding, not at $15 million a year, but they still liked him to a sense. And there was some thought of possibly coming back after the Deshaun deal. But like, if you look at the way this fits in, Steve, with Michael Thomas, a true outside big body guy, a burner in Chris Olave, and then you have the opportunity for Jarvis now to work in the slot and work in the middle of the field. Like, they can play off each other well. Obviously, yeah, a lot of this hinges on Jameis Winston, but they thought that what they saw, and it was what, five games, right? A guy that protected the football and had a 104 quarterback rating. I know we can talk about stats all we want, but like, he played within the way they wanted him to play. And I think that's a telling aspect of how Jameis played, is because we want you to do this, and they saw him do it. And so I think that defense is still I think they're a top 5 defense in football. And then all the weapons now you surrounded him, it's going to make life actually easier on him now than it was last season with who he was trying to get the football to.
Yeah, I just think, knowing the character of that team and the guys on that team, they probably realize they've got a 2-year window, so why not go for it right now? Mm-hmm. Let's look at the age of the guys on this team, and supplant we could supplant. But at playing in that dome, you think Jarvis isn't going to mind playing in a dome? Mm-hmm. When he was playing out, Miami in the blazing heat, as he did at LSU, but then in Cleveland in the weather, and now he's got climate controlled, because they don't just play at domes, in New Orleans. They play some in Atlanta, one in Atlanta. So again, this is a team. I'm like, we can start talking about the Saints now, because mm-hmm. Jameis is good to go with some of the talent, exodus to the AFC. They're right there with the Packers, and they're right there with the Rams in the NFC.
You're counting the team, Steve, on one hand, right? In the NFC. I think that plays to their favor tremendously. I mean,
and they beat the Bucs in the regular season.
Yeah, they do own the Bucs.
They do.
It's and honestly, Steve, you mentioned the window. You get former team veterans back. You get Mark Ingram back for his last dance in New Orleans, and all of these guys coming home. And James, you mentioned the story of Tyrann Mathieu. There was the Spice incident when he was at LSU, was kicked off of the team, had to take his own route to the NFL. And there was a kind of dismissal of Tyrann Mathieu down there on the Gulf Coast. And he ultimately is now a huge donor in the LSU football program, donating his time and his money there. He's shown that forgiveness, and it's kind of a reminder that when these guys are 19, 20, 21 years old, they're not finished products. And as adults, right, we should be able to understand that and see that the growth that they can have and the contributions they can make. And speaking of contributions, before we go, guys, a shout out to the Buffalo Bills Foundation, the NFL Foundation, combining to donate $400,000 to local response efforts after the shooting at the supermarket in Buffalo. The Bills announced that a combined $200,000 is going to go to the Buffalo Together Community Response Fund, trying to address things that concern marginalized people, especially. And we see the myriad of ways, not just in this violence, but structural and interpersonal violence as well that impact people as well. So thank you to the Bills and the NFL. And thank you to Steve Wyche and James Palmer here on my first ever trip on the NFL Inside Report. Hope it was good for you guys.
That was wonderful.